Thank you, Mr. Douglas Noll, for joining us today. I welcome all of you here for this fireside chat with Mr. Douglas Noll. He's a mediator based in USA. Let me just give a brief introduction of Douglas here. Douglas Noll left a successful career as a trial lawyer to become a peacemaker. His calling is to serve humanity, and he executes his calling at many levels. He is an award-winning author, teacher, trainer, and a highly experienced mediator. Also, he is working in the field of restorative mediation so passionately that after meeting him, I ordered his book, How to De-Escalate an Angry Person in 90 Seconds. I read it, and let me confess this, Douglas, to you, that it is an amazingly easy read book, which has so many benefits to it. I tried it on Akanksha and then excited her to read the book herself. So thank you for that. Thank you for suggesting that reading to us. And just establishing some ground rules here. All of you, this is a fireside chat. You can anytime unmute yourself. You can raise your hands. You can ask questions to Douglas. You can put the questions in your chat box. So it's an open room here, open discussion. Before we start with the fireside chat, I would like to ask Akanksha to say a few words, and then we can start.
Thank you, Pasma, and thank you, Doug, for joining us today. And restorative mediation, yes, it is very close to our heart because it joins two areas where we work in restorative justice and mediation. I am a research scholar. I'm doing a PhD research on restorative justice, and that is how I came in contact with it. So this session today particularly is very dear to me, and I look forward to learning so many skills that I have come across in your book especially. So thank you again for joining us.
You're welcome.
think so when we are talking about it, we can actually start by asking Doug that how did you end up joining restorative mediation after you had a successful career as a lawyer?
Well, I had two paths going on in my life after I graduated from college and law school. On the outer path, I was a trial lawyer, and on the inner path, there was a calling to serve, and the two were inconsistent. But I lived with that inconsistency for many years until I took up the martial arts. And I studied a northern Chinese style of fighting, eventually earned my second degree black belt, and then my teacher fired me and told me to go learn Tai Chi. So I started studying Tai Chi.
Okay.
And Tai Chi has two interesting paradoxes. One is the softer you are, the more vulnerable you are. I'm sorry. The softer you are, the stronger you are. The more vulnerable you are, the more powerful you are. Soft to be strong, vulnerable to be powerful. Well, I didn't understand these paradoxes for a long time, but eventually they soaked into my soul until one day in the late 1990s, I was in a courtroom trying a case, and the thought came to me, what the heck am I doing in here? And after that trip, or after that court, it's early in the morning, I'm not quite functioning yet. After that trial, I had a vacation planned, and we went on a wilderness whitewater trip with a bunch of friends. And I spent a week on my raft all by myself thinking about how many people I'd served as a trial lawyer, and concluded I'd only really served 5 people, and decided that I was done being a trial lawyer, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So when I got back home after that trip, I was driving down out of the mountains where I live into the valley where my office was, and I heard the one and only public service announcement on our local public radio station for a new master's degree in peacemaking and conflict studies being offered at Fresno Pacific University in Central California. And it caught my attention. And I decided to check it out. And ultimately I enrolled, and my world changed. I had 2 mentors, Dalton Reimer and Ron Clausen. Ron was instrumental in starting the international they were both instrumental in starting the international restorative justice movement. The very first victim offender reconciliation program was founded at Fresno Pacific University in 1981, long before anybody even knew what restorative justice was all about. So I spent 3 years studying under the people who started restorative justice, and they were the masters. And I came to my studies as obviously an accomplished lawyer and scholar, and looking at this from a legal perspective. Ultimately, I left the practice of law in 2000 to become a full-time peacemaker and mediator, and was looking at the problems of legal mediation as we experience it here in the United States, and started exploring the idea of what would happen if we could bring plaintiffs and defendants together to talk about, especially in personal injury cases or accident cases or cases where there was injury, where in the legal system it's all about the money, and the people are pretty much ignored. And what would it look like if you could start bringing people together to not only talk about compensation, but to talk about the wrong? And so I started experimenting with it. I didn't have a lot of success in working with in accident cases because the plaintiff's lawyers didn't want their clients talking to the person who injured them, because I think they knew that I would get a reconciliation and the demand for money would go way down, and the plaintiff's lawyers wouldn't make as much money because they work on a contingency basis. And the insurance lawyers didn't want to do it because they were just concerned about getting the insurance company to protect it, and they weren't really too interested in the defendant and working with the reconciliation. And that's just the way the legal system is, and it's part of the reason why I left. That people really don't, the lawyers really don't care about the people or the problem. So then I started applying it in non-litigated cases, and I had got some really good success. And so that's how it started.
Great. So, Doug, here I want to ask that when you say that you started practicing restorative mediation in the non-litigating cases.
Right.
So what is exactly non-litigating cases? Because I totally agree with you. I am an advocate myself and a mediator based in Delhi, and we face this problem with lawyers in India also. We have separate sessions on mediation advocacy, where we try to create this awareness among lawyers to tell them that mediation is actually not reducing the size of the pie. It is not taking their share from the pie. It is increasing the size of the pie. So that is what exactly is the non-litigating case that you just mentioned?
So one of my very first engagements, I think it was in 2000, was to work with a very large real estate brokerage company in Silicon Valley. It was the largest real estate brokerage firm in San Jose, California, Santa Clara County. And the two partners of that firm were so angry at each other that they could only communicate by passing notes under each other's doors. In those days, there wasn't email like there was today, or texting, or any of that stuff. In fact, I'll never forget on that trip, Wi-Fi, they were just experimenting with Wi-Fi. And the lawyers, who were pretty tech savvy, had laptops that had big clunky laptops that had Wi-Fi connections. They were playing around with Wi-Fi in the hotel where we did the mediation. So, and there was no litigation in that case. They had not sued each other, but they needed to do two things. They needed to restore their relationship, and they needed to solve their business problem. And that was my first application of restorative justice principles to a commercial case where there are significant monetary stakes and there is injury and offense that needs to be repaired. And since that time, I've done a number of different kinds of conflicts, including family business conflicts, particularly in large agricultural families here in the Central Valley of California. Some of the largest growers and ranchers in the world are here, billion-dollar enterprises. And when it's in the family and they've got family dynamics that are not good, and they don't have the tools to run both a large business operation and maintain family relationships, restorative mediation has turned out to be a very powerful way to help people resolve deep conflicts that arise within the family structure. And also corporate disputes on boards of directors or internal working teams where, again, there's no lawsuit filed and they have a dual goal of reconciling their relationships at the same time strengthening their business operations. So I found that restorative mediation is extremely effective in these situations.
Where you realize that reconciliation of the relationship is one main factor, that both the parties agree that they are not going to break the relationship and they want to continue with each other. They just don't know how.
That's right. They don't have the tools. Most people, and I'm sure this is true in India as well as North America, most people do not have the tools to deal with conflict well. We live in a culture here in the United States that gives privilege to rationality over emotions. People believe in rational choice theory, although it's obviously been disproven. And what the true fact is that we're 98% emotional and 2% rational. And families do not have good tools for teaching children how to be emotionally competent. And 98% of all families are emotionally dysfunctional, and they raise emotionally dysfunctional adults. And when those people are in business, or in business and family relationships, for example, conflicts arise, and they just don't have the tools for dealing with the problem.
Right.
And so the problem gets worse until they call in somebody like myself to help them figure things out.
Yeah, please go ahead, Akanksha.
Yeah, so Doug, in this situation where there is a personal relationship involved, there would be a lot of emotional impulse during the process, which would lead to deadlocks or impasse between the parties. So how do you deal with that?
Well, my typical process is to spend some time diagnosing the problem. And so what I will do is if I accept an engagement, and I don't accept all engagements that are offered to me, but if I accept an engagement, then I meet separately with all of the stakeholders to find out what their perspectives are. And I'm basically assessing their readiness to make peace and their readiness to sit down with their colleagues and have some hard conversations.
Sort of like a preparation.
Pardon me now?
Sort of like a preparation orientation session.
Yeah, it's a lot of preparation and coaching them, explaining them what the process is going to be, coaching them on how I want them to behave, explaining ground rules to them, talking about the process, answering questions, trust building, a lot of trust building, so that they know that they have confidence that I'm going to maintain an emotionally safe container for everybody, and alerting them that this is not going to be easy. It's hard work. And then when I've got everybody ready, we come together in a joint meeting. I do no caucusing. This is all joint session work, and it's a 3-step process that follows the restorative justice processes that I learned from Rana and Dalton, which is the first thing we do is tell stories, share perspectives. And after one person has told a story, another person is required to reflect back both the meaning and the emotions of what the storyteller experienced. And that's a very powerful moment. And it's hard for people to do. Then after everybody has told their stories and they've all been validated in terms of their experiences, then we start looking at how we engage in an interest-based, the 2 steps. One, we look at what are the injustices that everybody has experienced, and we identify the injustices. And then we go through a process of looking at what are the underlying interests and identifying those underlying interests that need to be satisfied. And then from there, we work on reconciling the injustices, which is almost always symbolic. There's symbolic reparation of some kind. It could be apology, it could be a number of different things. And we start building a plan for reaching an agreement on the underlying conflict dynamics. And ultimately, if we're successful, we come up with a fairly detailed written agreement that talks about what people are going to do. And it talks about what happens if somebody doesn't do what they say they're going to do, what they're going to do. So we're always looking for the problem, anticipate the problems that could arise, and talk about how do we prevent all this from happening again in the future.
So, Doug, is there a case which is particularly close to your heart? You remember a case doing a matter which got stuck with you, and maybe there is a sense of achievement that yes, it was a problem which even I thought that hard to get the parties to reconcile with each other. Is there something close to your heart that you would like to share? Obviously, I know that there is an underlying factor of confidentiality in mediation. So if you want to just discuss with anonymous names.
Well, I can talk about one case that you walk into these things and you never know what's going to happen. And the day I stop feeling a little bit of anxiety around these cases is the day that I've got to stop being a mediator. Because, you're dealing with human beings and you're dealing with high emotions, and until you get them into the process and get things moving, anything could happen. But I did have one case which involved a family business, three brothers, and a father. Father was obviously older, and one of the sons had embezzled a couple $100,000 from the business, and ultimately he paid back the money, and we had a meeting with he and his wife and his father and mother, and basically he apologized to his father. He was, he was a man who was in his late 40s, in tears, obviously humiliated and saddened by the fact that he had abused the trust of the family. And there was a reconciliation that occurred. If this had gone to a lawsuit and they kicked him out of the business and bought him out, the relationship would have
There
never
would
been
have been a
restored.
permanent scar in the relationship, and the distance would have increased had it gone to litigation. So you made the son reflect and realize his own emotions, which he was not realizing originally. So if I'm remembering it right, that is case labeling, affect labeling, affect labeling that I read in your book.
Affect labeling.
Right.
So I developed affect labeling. Again, I was in a very difficult mediation in Santa Barbara, California in 2005. This was a divorced couple. The husband was suing the wife for $18,000 US on a really stupid thing. And it wasn't about the money. It was about unfinished business in the relationship. But they were so angry at each other that when I first met them, they were well-presented, upper middle class people. Had there been knives on the table, there would have been blood on the floor. It was some of the vilest, angriest people I'd ever seen. And I was thinking, oh my God, what am I going to do with these people? And because I'd been studying neuroscience for a number of years, and studying the neuroscience of emotions, all of a sudden the thought came to me, listen to the emotions. So I had the woman, we'll call her Susan, listen to John tell his story, and instead of summarizing and paraphrasing his story, I had her tell us what John was feeling as he told his story. And at first she had a little struggle with it, but I coached her, and I had no idea what I was doing. And within 5 minutes, she went from being a victim to feeling totally empowered. And he completely calmed down. So they got through John telling his story, and then I had John do the same thing with Susan. Susan told her story, and John basically labeled her emotions, reflected back her emotional experiences. And when they were done, John put his face in his hands and started sobbing, really deep, racking sobs, for a good 3 minutes. It was intense. And got some tissue and blew his nose and cleaned himself up and looked across the table and said, "That's the first time you've listened to me in 25 years." And they talked about how stupid the case was, settled it right there. I didn't do anything. Got up, walked out holding hands to have lunch with each other. And 3 hours before, they would have been killing each other. And my jaw dropped. I said, what just happened? And so that's how I began to study this concept known as affect labeling. And then 2 years later, Matthew Lieberman, a neuroscientist out of the University of California at Los Angeles, UCLA, published a brain scanning study showing exactly what happens in the human brain when affect labeling occurs. So there was the science to support what I had been observing. And what happens, without getting too technical, let's see, okay, I'll try to explain it this way. So first, there are a lot of concepts around affect labeling that are counterintuitive, counternormative, and fly in the face of everything we think we know about emotions. The first big concept is that we're 98% emotional and only 2% rational. We are emotional beings. That's what separates us from other species, not our rationality. We're not rational beings at all. We have moments of rationality, but we are not, as a general rule, rational. All decision-making is emotional. Second, we're not born with emotions. We're born with something called affect. And affect is basically the feeling of pleasantness and unpleasantness that we experience throughout the day. There are 9 basic affect, and we construct emotions out of affect. And we start that process at about 18 months of age, when the emotional centers of the brain start to mature and come online. When we're born, we have these nascent brain structures, but they're not working yet. Not like they will when we get into adulthood. So, in order to learn emotions, they're cognitive constructs. We have to associate various affective states